Staci Thomas, you are a professor of practice at the Olin Business School at Washington University. Thank you for coming in today. And I'll say, as a graduate of the Olin Business School, it is the best business school.
Thank you for having me. I wholeheartedly agree. I do think it is the best business school, and I have the luxury of teaching in a couple of our programs. So, yeah, it's a fantastic place to work.
Have you been a professor at other schools?
I have not been a professor at other schools. I've actually had kind of a circuitous career path, if you will. I started my career actually as a translator in the Air Force. And that kind of, once I left the Air Force, I morphed that into a career in marketing, in international marketing, right? Because I wanted to be able to use that.
Translator, Air Force.
Yes.
What language?
Mandarin.
Mandarin, Chinese.
Yes.
Okay. And how did you become so proficient in Mandarin Chinese?
So the military has a school in Monterey, California. Luxury, living in the lap of luxury in Monterey, California. Mm-hmm. It's the Presidio of Monterey. And at that school, they teach most of the world languages, right? You don't get to choose which language you're going into. You have to take a test that's it's called the Defense Language Aptitude Battery. And based on your scores on the test, they assign you to a language based on your skill set.
Were you in the Air Force?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, I was.
So we got some stuff to unpack. So how did you end up in the Air Force? Tell me about that.
I always wanted to be in the military. It was when I was a kid, I had 2 or 3 little career paths in my mind. Everybody says, what do you want to be when you grow up? Mm-hmm. I never really knew, but I knew I loved culture. I loved language. I still really embrace those 2 things. There's something that I'm just very passionate about. It's a hobby as much as anything. And so, even as a kid, I loved fairy tales from other countries, right? I really just wanted to understand how culture functioned. And it kind of became clear that language is such a huge element of culture. You can't understand a culture if you don't know the language.
So did you find that maybe their fairy tales were maybe different, but the morals are common across culture?
Morals are pretty common for fairy tales are actually super similar, right? The character changes, but the plight of the character is always kind of the same. But nonetheless, it was, between that and just, I don't know, I had this drive for maybe, I don't know if it's discipline or structure or something that I like. I'm comfortable in that space. And so I always wanted to be in the military. And I knew when I walked in the door to sign the papers, I said, I'm not doing this unless I can be a translator.
What did your folks think when you were like, I'm going to the Air Force?
Very supportive.
They were?
Very supportive.
Are you from a military family at any level?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. My grandfather was in World War II.
Okay.
But yeah, other than that, no, not at all from a military family. It was something that was just me running rogue, I guess. And I think, there's probably actually a little bit of that running rogue, if you will, call it that. That's just kind of, I was ready to go. It was, 18 years old and I'm like, let's do this.
Okay, so you went high school to Air Force?
High school to Air Force, and I went into, I did some studies while I was in the Air Force, but then I didn't complete my degree until I was out of the Air Force, and I was working in marketing. And
really?
So I was working full time, going to school at night, and then international marketing just kind of morphed into marketing, corporate communications. I was working for industrial companies, industrial and product manufacturers, and I moved into biotech. And eventually it was kind of like, I really want to use my language again. I want to use that Mandarin again. And so I went back to school. By this point I had a master's degree, but I wanted to maybe teach in some respect. I didn't want to be an elementary school teacher, even a high school teacher. I wanted to work with adult learners, but
you wanted to go pro.
I didn't know that I wanted to go pro. I didn't think I didn't know if I wanted to put in the work to go pro, if you will, right?
I can get behind that, yeah.
It's a lot of work. But what I did do was think, maybe just as, like a hobby, I'll volunteer, do ESL or something. But to finish that degree, I had to do a teaching practicum. And in that practicum, because of my background, they placed me at the engineering school at Washington University.
Okay.
Right? Because they have a huge Chinese student base, and because I had this background in industrial product manufacturing and biotech.
All right. So it made the most sense to them, at least at that time.
At that time. And then from there, I just kind of made the jump over to the business school, and I've been there. I've been there now for 12 years.
Okay, so fair to say from, on your way to becoming a professor, you didn't really know you were going to be a professor.
I didn't.
And so what do you think? How's being a professor?
It's amazing,
Okay.
right? And I think the reason that I love it is because I feel like I am doing something different every day. I get to work with so many different people that have so many strengths and neuroses.
Right.
Right. And, the challenges are kind of never ending, but the scope of conversation is incredible. And I think that that's probably one of the things that I love about it as I love learning. And, I kind of mentioned that when I was a kid, I just really love this process of learning, whether, it's about other cultures or within that's, I'm hell on trivia night. I'll give you that. So if you got a trivia night, I'm your person to call.
Okay. You got a ringer here. Did you enjoy, like when you were in school, did you enjoy learning the assigned work or did you enjoy learning what interested you?
Yes and yes. I enjoyed doing the assigned work as long as I understood the purpose behind the assigned work.
Okay,
right?
so there's a qualifier.
Yes.
Okay.
And to give you a really good example of that, I remember it was, I think it was Algebra 2, and I had a teacher she was teaching us logarithms. And I remember it so distinctly because, and this was back in the 80s, and we had a chart in the back of the book, right? You had to reference this chart to complete the formula. And I raised my hand in class and legitimately asked the question because I wanted to know. I'm like, how do you actually use this?
Yes.
Because, as we used to say back then, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket all the time.
Yeah,
And
they were way off.
But we're not going to have this chart in our pocket all the time. What's the practical application? And she sent me to the principal.
Because the principal had the answer or because she didn't care for your question?
I think, she thought it was insolent. Right?
Yeah.
To ask, okay, what's the practical application? Because it was just do the work.
Did you ever get the answer to that?
I never did get the answer. I still don't think I know the answer.
Of like logarithmic, the only thing I can think of is the shape of a curve.
Right.
The rate at which something increases or declines.
Yeah. And this is not something that I use every day. And I think, back then I didn't understand what's the point.
How often do you use it?
I don't.
Yeah. I don't. It's the only time I use it is when I'm charting something. It's like, do you want to see this in a logarithmic, rate of increase versus exponential?
Right.
And I'm like, nah, that's too much, and I'll take it back down to exponential or linear.
And but with that in mind, right? All of that being said, it really has translated that little moment in my life has kind of translated to a teaching philosophy that I have, and that is that anything that I'm producing or anything that I'm asking my students to produce has to be something that they can apply today in the real world, right?
That's a really good philosophy.
Well,
because I think there are students that leave school because they're thinking, this is stupid. I don't need to be doing this. I could be out earning money. I've got enough knowledge to go do that. I don't need to kind of stick out this last bit.
Well, and let me give you this, right? You can go on YouTube right now today and watch a lecture from an MIT professor.
Yeah.
And any topic that you want. And so, everybody's questioning the value of higher education, especially at the cost of higher education. And I do tend to ask myself every day, what am I bringing to the table that you can't get on YouTube? Right? But then the secondary element of that is I actually did the math on what a single class costs.
Yeah.
For our undergraduates. And so my mindset is always, is this a $300 day? So every student, every class they attend is roughly $300.
Yeah. Well, that's not nothing. And those those days add up. And I guess as you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, that's insane. And I'd paid for all that stuff in business school. And I guess what it does primarily is it's easy to not sit down and watch YouTube on how to do something, academic, to listen to a lecture. School does, one of the things it does is it's like a personal trainer. It's like I've now got a time and a place where I need to be.
Yeah, but therein lies a little bit of an issue that I'm seeing with our students, and that is they don't know that they have a time or a place that they need to show up, right? And then the question I ask them is, okay, this is a $300 day. Are you okay with skipping this?
Yeah, it sounds like you're sort of on the top side of a bigger issue right there.
It is. It is.
And so to pivot, so what do you teach then?
So I teach a course in management communication, and that's with our undergrads. And that's a big course. It's a monster with a lot of moving parts. We have every undergraduate business student has to take the course. That one has a focus on how to write, public speaking, and we also have a big career trek in that. And so we're trying to prep the students for the workforce. And I'll give you an example of some of the things that we're seeing there. And that is because it is so difficult to find strong professional talent, we have recruiters that are really looking at our students sophomore, freshman year.
Yeah.
And so if you want to go into investment banking, for example, you're really starting that process as a freshman. And you don't know when you're 18 years old that you shouldn't know.
Wow. So you got scouts out. It's just like professional sports.
It really is. But what we're hearing too is, and this is 82% of recruiting organizations are telling us students lack professionalism.
What is professionalism?
So within the context of my course, we look at that as, yes, you have to show up. Yes, you have to be physically and mentally present.
That's a low bar right there.
It seems like a
physically and mentally present means I'm just listening.
But listening is such a thing now, right? And, when you live in a world where everything is just short snippets, when people don't even process information unless it's 30 seconds, right? And I'll ask you this question. You go on social media, you look at a post, it's got a video. What's the first thing you look at before you decide you're going to click that video?
I don't use social media.
Most people look at
people don't read.
How long is the video? Yeah. And that's, you'll see at the top of, you go online, you look at an article and it'll tell you at the top, it's a 4-minute read.
Oh yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Right? Because we just don't have the attention span that we used to. And so it's a challenge in the classroom, not just to get them there, but to keep them mentally engaged.
Do we not have the attention span, or do we have so many competing priorities at any given moment?
Yes and yes.
Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah. So our attention span is definitely shorter than it ever used to be, and you've heard the phrase, right? It's now shorter than a goldfish.
Yeah, which is pathetically short.
It's pathetically short.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it's like at any point in history, most of the time people listen to respond. And not to understand. And so that's something that we are really coaching students on within the class is, okay, now I want you to look at me and talk to me about what I just said, how you interpret that, how are you going to synthesize these two concepts?
That can't be done.
You would be so surprised at the response I get. And it's, the blank looks of, I'm not sure how to do this. And so it's really a coaching process.
Let me interrupt you quickly, which is then what's their objective when they are at school?
So I would love to say it's to learn.
Okay.
I would love to say
But you don't feel like you
learn.
can say that.
I think for some students it's definitely to learn. And I could tell you what students those are in my classroom almost every semester
day
within the
one?
first couple weeks. 2 weeks.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you'll benefit of the doubt them for a couple weeks. And you're like, I knew I was right about that. Okay, got it.
But then I have others because again, it's when I say it's a big course, I mean it's a very time consuming course. It's the biggest one we have at Olin. It's 4 credit. So they're with me 4 hours a week. And I would argue some of them, the minute they come in, it's just about how do I get the job? I want the job. And that is part of the course. So I help them get the job, but they'll ignore kind of the rest of the content. We get to teamwork elements and they're difficult on a team. They're not applying the previous course concepts. They're not at all thoughtful about how they're communicating with their teammates or whether or not they're contributing in a way that's visible. And I think, you have this dilemma of some students go, well, I gave them so many ideas. They didn't use any of them. And I'm like, yeah, but look at all of these deliverables that you didn't touch.
Yeah. You're focusing on a small part.
Yeah.
And I interrupted you as I just did again, but I asked you about professionalism. You said, okay, you got to be there and you got to be physically present, mentally present. And what else is like, if you're talking to your class, professionalism is
listening, asking questions, being coachable. You don't know everything. Look at me and say it. You don't know everything. And that's actually really interesting because, they're teenagers, and I guess teenagers have always thought they know everything. But the number of students that will go into an internship and say, I have the idea that's going to save this company is really surprising to me. And so, I think humility
That happens?
It happens a lot.
They
Yeah.
show up with their manifesto for the company? And
Very much so.
Really?
I have my $1 million idea. Let's do it, right? Or this process is broken. Let me fix it. And the issue there is really kind of, in a way, comes down to audience orientation. You don't have the context. You don't know your audience. You don't know what the background of this issue is. But, they come in with, I know how to do a linear regression and some financial modeling, so I'm gonna change the world.
Wow, I guess, is that unaware to do that? Or is it inexperience?
I think it's, or is it hubris?
I was going to say hubris, but I didn't want to be, I don't know, hubris takes us, that's why I got to awareness.
Yeah.
Like,
it is awareness. It's self and other awareness. And I think broadly speaking, our students or kids now, I'll just say kids, people, don't have the real world experiences of just simply interacting with others that we used to have back in the 1900s, right?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, if you turn off the internet for a year, people would be walking out of their houses like they're coming out of bomb shelters, and they'd be like, "Oh, it hurts," and like and before you know it, all the neighbors are sitting on the stoop, they're talking, they're learning. Maybe they sweep up the street a little bit, and all that stuff that, I was born in the 70s, and all that stuff that I remember. But the other question I had to follow up is, why is it so hard to listen?
I think it's so hard to listen now because we expect to be entertained when we listen.
Okay.
Right? If it's not entertaining or we can't immediately apply it, there's another option. Right?
Okay.
I can move on to the other option. And so, if I imagine students that are sitting in my class and I'm not engaging them, they have a laptop or phone right there in front of them, and they know they have homework. They have 100 other things that are on their mind.
So just break that stuff out right then and there.
All the time.
It doesn't drive you nuts.
It drives me nuts. It's a constant
How do you
struggle.
not pick that up and just snap it over your knee?
I am pushing for it to be a policy. I was going to say corporate, but yes, policy. No electronics, unless you're allowed. Now it's really difficult to teach a course sometimes because you need electronics to teach it. You want them to have their laptop to do the work.
Yeah,
Right.
And we'll touch on this later, which is you are trying to put them in a real world scenario as much as you can. I mean, it happens in the corporate world where, especially on these Zoom calls now or Teams or whatever you have, where somebody's there, they're present and all that, but they kind of got some stuff going on the side, right?
They do. And, and it's what's really interesting is when I was younger, if somebody told me if I had a behavior that was unacceptable and somebody said, stop that, right? Which could come from anywhere. Could have come from the neighbor up the street. Stop doing that, right? We all worked together. You respected pretty much any adult or any authority who gave you that kind of feedback.
Without question, nearly.
Without question.
Yeah. I remember.
And so, but what I'll see now is I give them that feedback and they stop. But as soon as I look away, they're back at it. And I find this to be just a really interesting phenomenon because it's not about, there seems to be less concern about whether or not a person finds it disrespectful, right? Like, do I find it disrespectful that you got on your phone?
So they're a little
class?
confident, a little too soon.
Yes, but I also think too, it's just, I feel like there's just such an enormous lack of other awareness and the value of others. And, you think about it, it's like, okay, nobody, young people don't want to have kids anymore. Young people want to work remotely. All of these things that it's just, okay, I want to isolate. And you really can't. You have to be able to interact with others. And again, this is exactly what our employers are telling us. I need them to be able, I know they can do the math. I know they can work Excel. I know I can train them in this. I have the accounting software. I need them to have a conversation with me. I need to be able to put it in front of a client. Yeah.
I mean, you have a few more years of life experience than I do, but we probably heard
Like
the same thing growing up.
2 years, maybe.
Maybe. We're both in our 30s. And so when
We're not. I'm not.
well, maybe we're not. You heard likely growing up that, those kids who know how to use computers are going to run the world. And they kind of weren't wrong at that time and place.
Right.
But it's inflecting or there's a part inversion going on right now, which is, look, especially with that advent of AI, or we've always had AI, but in its current form, AI, the guy who can make an Excel sheet spin is not as important anymore.
Not nearly as important.
So what I'm pointing out ultimately in a really long and sort of clumsy way is that these things are starting to flip-flop, which is now your people person who can, sit there and have a meaningful conversation, look someone in the eye, stay on point, and respectfully listen to, even if they don't want to, by the way, and they're introspective, meaning that afterwards they can be like, okay, I hated every minute of that, but maybe they were right.
Well, and you ask yourself, what did you learn from it, right? Every conversation has a lesson. Even if it's a negative conversation, there's still a lesson. You have an opportunity to reflect on how you managed that, right? Or what did you hope to get out of the conversation in the first place? This is something I consistently talking to my students about when they start rattling off, and I'm like, okay, but what do you need? Why are you going into this conversation? Why are you writing that email? What is it you want to achieve? Are you hoping to persuade, to inform them, to build a relationship? What is it that you want to achieve? And I think, that helps quite a bit for them to just proactively go, okay, what is my
Had they
action?
thought about that before?
No.
I would imagine you get like 1,000-yard stare when you ask that question.
I do. And so, and sometimes I'll see this when they'll come to my office hours and they're upset about something. Say they're upset about a grade, and they just kind of they don't rail on me, but they start pushing back on it. And I'm like, okay, but what is it you would like to achieve in this conversation today? How do you want to walk
With
out?
the knowledge I'm not going to change your grade, what are you hoping to achieve here?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, you gave that to me. I didn't give it to you.
And I think those moments, those are incredibly strong teaching moments of, just asking them to, okay, reflect for a second.
1 second.
1 second on what it is that you want and who you're talking to, right? Like, what are my drivers? What are my motivators? Because that should change the way that you approach most of your communications and the way that you listen as well.
And so you're really, for those who are mentally present and listening, you're providing like a really good window into kind of how everyone a little bit older than them is thinking about it. And anyone who's sitting across the table to hire somebody has wised up to this, or else they wouldn't be the one hiring.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So you need to get with this.
Exactly. And, you asked, again, what are points of professionalism? And I will bring it to this other point of professionalism that I'm hearing. And this relates a lot. DEI is such a buzzword. Yes. Right? And so we hear a lot about DEI, but the one thing that our recruiters keep coming back to is they're like, nobody talks about generational gaps.
It's extremely important.
It's extremely important. And we need people who are respectful of different generations and how those generations were raised, how they function within the workplace, what those expectations are. And even if you don't like that boomers are used to working 50, 60-hour weeks, you don't have to like it, but you need to understand that that's very much a generational workplace behavior, right?
Yes. And there's a lot of, they may find over time that there's a lot of efficiency that comes along with that level of partitioning. I mean, you can just leave all that stuff at work.
Yes.
In like your weekends, you don't have to have your computer sitting out. And when you go on vacation, you can actually go on vacation. So you're setting up boundaries is what you're doing. And you I don't know, maybe it's just so far different now that sort of an amorphous lifestyle in that way is totally fine. But I think there's a lot to be said for having it creates balance, in my opinion. At first blush, I don't believe it feels that way because you're
Right.
like, oh, I'm locking myself into this. But you can give yourself a mental pass by saying, I don't need to be thinking about that right now.
You try not to, right? But I do think, you know, older generations, work is life, right? And so as much as you do want to compartmentalize, a lot of people don't, right? Like I don't compartmentalize very well. I teach almost all of my coursework in the fall. So in the spring, I am air quote off.
Okay.
I'm never off.
Yeah. Well, you
Right?
mentioned earlier it's a bit of a hobby as well.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So,
And I guess maybe it's that whole do what you love and you never work a day in your life.
yeah. No, I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
But I think you're always working has never been more true than it is now.
Right. Well, you can't, it's difficult to unplug, especially when you don't want to, right?
Yeah.
It used to be, I could go home at 5:00 and nobody thought about calling me at 5:00 at night,
No, it's dinner time.
right? Nobody would do that. You didn't call, you didn't ask people to work after hours. And now it's just, you know, I literally have a little note at the bottom of my email that says, although I may email after hours, I do not expect that of you.
Yeah, that's nice. Do you mean it?
I do mean it.
Okay.
I do
That's
mean
even
it.
more nice.
Yeah, no, I really
So you're
do
like
mean it.
mentally keeping score, like, you know, there's the law of reciprocity sort of rearing up a little bit.
Yeah, and you know, I will say too, I think because I'm a professor, if I email after hours, I think like maybe my teaching assistants or even my students feel like they have to respond. And they don't. They don't need to respond.
Well, they're sort of right and wrong.
I don't expect them to respond.
I know, but you notice when they do. You know, you're right. You don't. It's kind of like, okay, you think to yourself, they care.
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't have an expectation, but I'll remember. It's kind of like when you write someone a handwritten note and you get it, and you're like, you didn't have to do that.
It sends a message, right? Like all of these behaviors send a message of professionalism
Do you talk about handwritten notes ever?
all the time.
There's nothing more powerful right now.
There's nothing more powerful. And everybody looks at me like I'm an alien when I say, no, when you interview for the role, sit down and write a note to every single person that you talk to and put it in the mail.
I'm such a strong believer in writing that. And I didn't, I had a mentor who's unfortunately passed away, but he used to just bang on me constantly. And he goes, you need to write X number of notes per week. And he goes, especially the people who haven't been relevant to you in the last 6 months. He's like, life's a team sport. He's like, make sure that you're in, you don't do it just because you're sort of always plotting, but he's like, these are people important to you, and just everyone's always helped somebody, right? In some way, you say, hey, that little thing you did, thank you.
That mattered, right?
Yeah.
That little thing that you did mattered. And the fact that I remembered that little thing tells you that it mattered to me. And I want you to know that, right? It's a nicety, it's a courtesy. I feel like it's a little bit of a lost art.
We literally got so there was a podcast guest here that like a week or two afterwards, we got a handwritten note, and everyone here has held it and been like, that was so nice.
Right? And then if you put it on really nice paper.
They won't throw it away.
Right? I even say, I'm like, the type of paper you use matters.
Well, it's so funny because we said this was so nice. I didn't even notice what the card was.
Right.
We just opened it. We're like, what a nice guy.
Right?
And
Yeah.
I'll remember that. Like if I see him broken down on the side of the road, I might stop and pick him up now.
But here's, I'll give you this dilemma that's actually happening a lot is I get the question of, well, can I just use AI to generate that? I'm like, you can.
You can.
You can. Are they going to know? And I'm like, probably not. But I feel like you're kind of missing the point.
Yeah, the idea is to take a time out and to do some thinking on your own.
Yes. It makes you a better human.
It does. I believe it does.
It makes you a better human.
I'm willing to even make that a judging criteria.
We're finding employers are making it a judging criteria.
So how much interfacing are you doing? Like, how are you getting these words from the employers? Like, how do you?
Oh, so I recently had a project, right? We're making some changes at the business school, and we've got a couple focuses specifically on experiential learning, right? We want students actually doing the things that they would be doing in the workplace, right? So we're working with more organizations to provide students those opportunities. We're also doing individualized learning tracks, right? And so students have the opportunity to craft kind of their own distinction. And so maybe you study finance, but you want a distinction in investment banking. And so students can craft that themselves. But then the other thing, and these elements were coming from our recruiters. We talked to recruiters, what do we need? What do our students need? And then the last one was increased professionalism would be really great. And that one actually came in, as we talked to recruiters, that one comes in really high. That this is something that we need to get out of students from every school. But we really, wanted our students to understand. I want my students to understand at a different level, right? And this is kind of my project at the school. But I want our students to understand it at a different level, and that if you focus it on the people around you rather than yourself, right? Like, then it becomes so much easier. Because the question I'll get is it okay for me to wear this when we have a course client in the classroom or a guest speaker in the classroom? And I'll go, well, what do you think they're going to wear?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's, oh, I guess I shouldn't. Right? And I said, well, yeah, stop thinking about what you want or what you can or should. I'm like, take that word you out of it. And if you shift it to the other person.
In a general sense, you'll never regret not being the worst dressed in the room.
Oh, you'll never regret it. Right?
It was funny. I was trying to teach we have two boys, they're 10 and 8. I was trying to teach them that, which is you guys look like you're going to a rock concert every time. You get like T-shirts and like all this stuff on. And granted, I'm not terribly formal today, but in general, I was trying to teach them this cold hard truth, I suppose, these days, which is you're going to get treated how you look.
Absolutely.
And so I said, we're going to go to Charlie Guido's. And we're going to put on a coat and tie because that's a place that used to be coat and tie exclusively. And now you can go there any way you'd like. And so the guy running the place, we got there and he walked up to our boys and shook their hands, gave him his card and goes, "Thank you for dressing up for dinner tonight. You guys
That's
look
amazing."
great." And he noticed it like that. And I said, if we'd walked in with our KHTR T-shirts on and, and just kind of were hanging out, he wouldn't even noticed us walking in the room.
And I bet you got better service.
We did. Everyone commented, like, the boys look great. Sarah looked beautiful. And, I looked like me. And everyone noticed.
So there's some interesting research that came out of Harvard with a man named John Antonakis. And it's called charismatic leadership theory, right? But the whole premise behind this and the analogy that he uses is you have a price tag around your neck. Right? No matter where you go. And that is your value. And a lot of that, well, all of it, right, at that first glance is, what do you look like? And a lot of that you can't control, right? Does your chin jut out too much? Or your teeth a mess? What is it, right? And so you have elements of this that you cannot control. And so, and they actually even did this test with kids to kind of say, all right, do kids see the same thing? And so kids couldn't understand necessarily, like, who would you vote for was the first one, right? Like, who would you vote for to adults? And they just showed them pictures and everybody was picking the same man, right?
Yeah.
I'm always going to vote for this person. Everybody picked the same person based on what they look like. And so with children, it would be, who would be a better boat captain, right? And they picked the same people. Right? Over and over. And so it was this assessment of competency and likability that's just based on a photo, which is, you really can't control what you look like. And so the second tier of the research is, okay, how do we change that? How do we change the price tag through charisma, right? Like, how can we increase our perceived charisma? And they ultimately determined a set of behaviors, both verbal and nonverbal behaviors, that increase your charisma by up to like 60%.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you remember any of them?
Oh, sure. It's, moral imperatives, right? This is a critical thing for us to achieve because, we have a moral duty to humanity. Or contrast were another one. It's the whole not only but also ask not what you can do for your country, right?
Yeah.
And so these very, these time-tested rhetorical
They're like
principles.
devices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're largely language-based. And a lot of them, there's also some nonverbals, like how do you move? How do you use space? How is your executive presence? But these were things that are coachable.
Yes.
Right? These are things that are learnable. And so, a lot of people say, okay, well, you're just naturally charismatic.
Perhaps.
But the research says no, right? The research says some people are just coached their whole life, right?
Well, I would say that there are people who just their mannerisms by way of coincidence, right, just are sort of more engaging than others.
They are. And, posture matters, right? And this comes through in the research. Posture matters. The way you move your hands matters. But it's a really interesting research. And I work with a lot of students to try and integrate this into their
How do they feel?
speeches,
How do
to their
students these days feel about that? Where they seem like, might feel like it's unjust that, we could look at just a couple mugshots basically and say, that's the guy we want.
It is unjust. We still do it, right? It's always say, don't judge a book by its cover. We judge book by covers all day, every day.
Well, it allowed us to
Right?
to get through the process of evolution.
Your kids walked into Charlie Gito's
Yeah.
and were judged,
Yeah.
right? As soon as they walked in the door. And so it's happening. And, actually, this is the first day of class. I do this. I have a slide that says, you don't know me, but you've already decided if you like me.
Yes.
And then I'll tell them, I'm going to leave the room. I want you to talk about me, and I want you to just tell your peers how you judged me. What did you use to judge me?
And do they report this to you?
They do. And so I come back, my trick is I'm like, you don't have to tell me what you said, but tell me what you heard, right? And it
Well
comes
done.
back with hair, smile, energy, right? Whatever the things are. And I say the same thing. So not my credentials at all.
Right.
You did judge me on my credentials.
And that sounds about right.
Yeah. You judged me on the fact that I said hello when you came in the classroom. You judged me on what I look like, how I'm moving, whether I seem engaging. And then I throw out the big spoiler, and that is, I did the same thing to you.
That's pretty good.
And so I am. I'm like, that's basically what our course centers on, is how are you presenting yourself to the world? And you can see, some of them are lounging back and they sit up a little bit straighter, or they pull the hood back.
Right. No, you do. Like they're kind of being like,
Yeah.
it's kind of nice to see that the competition's still existing.
Yes.
And that despite all things, there is the kind of survivor instinct to not be left in the dust.
Exactly.
And I think that's brilliant the way
Yeah.
you introduce that from the jump.
Yeah, from the jump. And that's it. I'm like, there's only one chance I have to make this point, and it is right here, right now.
Yeah, I mean, they'll remember that forever.
I hope so.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, I hope
and
so.
hopefully maybe they sit up a little straighter at their job interview.
I hope so.
I mean, that's part on the interviewer as well.
It is.
If they're in there just kind of not terribly inspiring, a lot of people
Yeah.
tend to mirror. And so
They do. And, there's such a thing as the stress interview.
tell me
Right.
about that.
Oh, yeah. No, our students sometimes get the stress interview, which is, kind of a good cop, bad cop interview. So they'll have somebody who interviews them, gets them through the gateway, and then they go in and they talk to somebody who's just awful.
Okay.
Right? Asks them a question and then tells them that's stupid response. And I've had
And this is
students.
by design.
This is by design. Because,
Okay.
their whole thing, and I'm not saying it's a good tactic. I'm saying we are seeing some of it. But the whole objective is, I want to see how you respond under pressure. Are you willing to defend your idea?
Okay.
Right? And I had a student that came back and said, I just walked out.
Not a stress person.
Like, okay.
And they walked out because they didn't like being treated that way.
They didn't like
type
being
of thing.
treated that way. And that's fair. That's fair.
It is fair. It's unfortunate
Yes.
because we all have to shovel for some period of time. And
I shoveled for a long time.
yeah, I did a lot of shoveling myself.
Yeah.
And that seems to be, barring, I guess, nobody, kind of the trajectory. That's the journey, is that you've got to start somewhere and get better.
Right.
And maybe one day you can put down a shovel.
Yeah, exactly. And
Pick up a different kind.
But here's the thing. Once you've shoveled for a while, you're never afraid to pick up the shovel.
You know how to use it.
Yeah, you know how to use it. You're not afraid of it. You don't get mad when you have to use it, right? And you also realize, okay, I wouldn't ask anybody else to use a shovel if I wouldn't use the shovel.
Well, yeah, that's the problem though, is that when someone is too good to pick up the shovel, it's infuriating.
Yes.
Because you're like, I can't believe I'm surrounding myself by people who won't do that.
Yeah.
You know, and you're just like, come on, just
And
do it.
I will give WashU students that. They will pick up a shovel.
Uh-huh.
You know, they will do the work. They're pretty gritty. I will give them that.
Yeah. No, well, that was my experience. And the WashU does a good job of, you know, perhaps you got some of this in the Air Force, which does a good job of creating team. And you're not sort of maybe dehumanizing the way it can occur,
Right.
but you are de-emphasizing the individual and you are emphasizing the team, which is, I think for a lot of people, you know, by the time you're doing an EMBA, most of us had sort of been through the process of like, okay, I'm not the only reason this company works. But some people really...
So we are expendable.
Yeah, we are expendable. Actually, someone could replace me.
Yes.
So let me ask you this. What do you think are 3 great interview questions? If you were interviewing someone,
Oh, gosh.
what would be your top 3? Why are you here?
No, the why are you here, right? That one's always coached. They always have the perfect response for that. You know, I think the passion question is fascinating because most people really have no idea what they're passionate about, right? But they're happy to say, oh, I'm a very passionate person. And when I say, well, what are you passionate about? They don't have any idea. Right?
Well, especially
and so,
even
yeah.
if you're 22, 23.
Yeah. And so, you know, and I think another really great question is, you know, what do you think we could improve at this company? You know, assuming they've done the research, right? What is something about this company? You know, I know you're going to tell me all of the reasons you want to work here. What's the hang up?
All right.
Right? Like, what would be your hang up? What would be a reason you might not want to work here?
Yeah, I could come up with, you know, anything I would say off the cuff would probably not get me hired.
You know, and I actually had that question asked of me when I went to WashU, or some version of that. And they said, what's going to be the most challenging thing for you to work here? And my answer was, it's the culture.
Yeah. I mean, just like in academia in general?
Academia, right? Because I was coming from corporate. I was coming from the business place. And so it was so autonomous that I didn't know what to do with it.
Yes. Okay.
It's so autonomous and so siloed that was just really unusual.
School or work was?
Work.
Like
and
corporate, I mean.
Yeah. No, school, academia.
Yeah.
Is very siloed.
Okay. Meaning that econ's econ, history's history, and...
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And like I could, if I wanted to, go weeks without talking to a colleague.
Well,
Talk to
that's
students.
crazy.
It's crazy, right? But and that's not me. I'm not, you know, I'm not happy in that kind of a space. And so, you know, it's something that I you know, I get to talk to students, and so that's good. But it is something I needed to know, I needed to be aware about, and I needed to navigate when I went into academia.
Because you'll see, we all sit in the same room.
Yeah.
And I think like the overflow of information between people who know what they're doing is so it helps me all the time.
Yeah.
Because as you know, great or smart as I think I could ever be, you're not.
Right. And, you know, and on the best teams, it's, you know, your output is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes.
And, you know, I love those situations. And so, you know, I try to create them where I can.
And so is that something you're trying to impart upon your students of how to create that condition or that circumstance amongst a group of people?
You know, and it's interesting because I think, you know, we were talking about, do people self-reflect?
Yeah.
Right? Do you have an awareness of others? But, you know, likewise, do you have an awareness of yourself? And so this is a funny little exercise that I do with my students, and that is when we work on teams, one of the requests that I'll have of them is I want you to do a Zoom meeting. And I think that this is a great idea really for anybody who wants a little bit of understanding on how you function on a team. So I want you to have a Zoom meeting and I want you to record it. And I said, I'm not interested in watching it. I'm not going to watch this video. I don't want to know anything about it. This is for you. And so when they come back into the classroom, I want you to take that transcript. We're going to upload that to AI, and we're going to ask some critical questions.
Oh, wow.
What percentage of the time did I speak? What questions did I ask that drove the conversation forward? Right? In what ways did I push back on other people's ideas? And so, we kind of just go through this little bit of a list of questions to see, okay, am I a contributing member of this team? In what ways am I obstructing progress? Right? Am I always saying no?
Okay.
Right? Do I crush souls?
Yeah. And sometimes there are managers out there that are fabulously effective.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the team doesn't defect. And they are just because they feel so great when they nailed it.
Right.
Because the praise does come maybe eventually, but that must be excruciating. So you're putting this transcript into ChatGPT, and is the classroom there?
They do it themselves, right? So we'll all be in the classroom, and I'll tell each of them, I want you to do this as an individual project, just so that you get an understanding. And so, and some students might, we had an hour-long meeting.
That could be a real beatdown.
It can be a real beatdown,
yeah.
Right? Well, it's certainly an eye-opener.
Yeah, for sure.
And the question is then, okay, let's reflect on that. And I would like to know, what is it that you would change about your approach? Because it's not good to be the person who, you spoke the least in that meeting, but it's also not good to be the person who spoke all the time in the meeting.
So
right?
What is the archetype here? Like who should they be in that meeting?
You want to be, the way that I would put this is kind of, I want to say it's always good to be a captain, right? You want to help other people get where they need to go, right? And so I would say, if you're right there in the middle, because one of the questions that comes up too is, did you speak to everybody? Right? Did anybody, the person who spoke 5% of the time, did anybody ask them a question? Did anybody try and engage them in this conversation? And once you start getting those sorts of things out there and people go, okay, it's not necessarily just the person who spoke 5% of the time. It's the fact that nobody else asked.
Right.
Right? And so, if you can find a space where you're somewhere in the middle, right? But what you're really doing is leaning on other people to pull in their strengths, that's going to create a really fantastic team, right? If everybody is saying, okay, how do I capitalize on the people around me? Not just dominate, not just try and avoid it, right? How do I bring in a positive approach to, or a culture of saying yes? Even if the idea is garbage, you say, tell me more.
Yes. Yes, tell me more.
Right.
We're probably going to pitch this, but tell me more.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Right? Because then all of a sudden people feel valued.
Yeah.
And they give you more.
What if the person shouldn't be valued based on how much, wow, you're actually saying more, and your value is going down in my mind.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's, in those points, it's a really, because this will come up, right? And you'll see this in the workplace too. It's like, well, I do all the work. And I go, okay, well, maybe that's the problem.
You do all the work because you do all the work.
Right. Maybe you're not giving other people a chance to thrive, right? Or maybe you're taking action without consulting with other people. Is everything that you're doing being used? What's the value that you're actually bringing? Or are you just busy? Right. And so I think it's always interesting when you go, okay, maybe this person is not an executor.
Yeah.
Right. They're not an executor, but they're a fantastic relationship builder.
Yeah.
How do you maximize that?
And how do you maximize it? Maximizing is, what I think what's implied in that is the idea that you've discovered that fact.
Right.
So how do you even go about discovering, you may have been meetings about a subject that they're not even comfortable opening their mouths about. So
Right.
you don't even know that they're a very social person. They're just like, their plan is, I don't keep my mouth shut because I
Right.
don't know what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And maybe I can get myself over to where I need to be at another time.
And there's a lot to be said for a person who will say, okay, this is not an area of expertise for me. I'm not comfortable engaging that, right? Because I think then you've sort of put that out there, but you also kind of realize, okay, maybe this isn't a space where I'm going to thrive and I need to figure out how I can contribute, right?
Yeah.
But the older I've gotten, the more I focused on trying to figure out what I do well
Yeah.
and to amplify that, because there's certain things I'm never going to be good at. Right?
What are things that you absolutely suck at doing?
I am horrible at data analysis.
Okay.
Hate it.
Hate it.
Hate it. And with that, it's like, okay, when I know I need to do it, I have to lean on other people, right? Or at least I have to have those checkpoints. And the other thing I know I need, I'm not a particularly disciplined person.
Sure.
And so every day for me is a checklist.
Right.
Every day with time stamps. From this time to this time, this is what I'm doing.
You're too interested in too much stuff.
I am. I get really diverted.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to fall down a rabbit hole, and I could give you 100. I could fall right down one right now.
So I don't even know, is it discipline or just it's more important to you to finish this little dive you're on and you'll just deal with the consequences of not jumping over to what you're supposed to be on?
There's that, right? And then, you've procrastinated. And some people call it procrastination, but I'm like, I didn't call it procrastination because I gained so much from that
I
exploration.
used to call it procrastination. My teachers would say, you're really procrastinating. I never felt that way.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that I don't procrastinate. I just don't put pen to paper till I know it's time. It's more efficient.
Yes. And, and I think, yes, I'm a percolator.
Yes.
Right. And so I like to gather information and then percolate on that for a while before I put pen to paper, for example. But, and I think that once you start recognizing what your strengths are and you can focus on those rather than trying to improve your weaknesses, you're much happier.
Yeah.
Right.
I was just kind of shed all that.
Yeah. I was a lot happier when I said, you know what? I'm just terrible at data analysis. I have to figure out a different way to manage that when it arises. And once I made that my project, figuring out a solution to that, I was so much happier, right? Because that's more interesting to me.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you don't like doing it, for every person that doesn't like it, there are many who do.
Hate it.
So if you're a manager, what are kind of your guideposts for managing? If you were, perhaps you do, but if you were sitting on top of an organization, what would be sort of your mental guideposts on how I'm going to manage this team?
Oh gosh, I think yes, identifying what my people do well, right? I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, you cannot underestimate the value of a common vision.
Yes.
Right? And a lot of times we think a team is aligned on something and they're not. Most of the time they're not. And so, really drilling into what does that common vision look like? Because, language is a funny thing and I might interpret that vision a little bit differently than somebody else on the team, or I might prioritize certain elements differently than another person on the team. And so sometimes, even chunking that a little bit further into, okay, right now, of the mission, this is the focus, right? Keeps things really driving forward. But, the other thing is to, and this is going to sound really funny in the age of social media, sentiment analysis, right? It's like, what's working for you today and what isn't working for you? And having that open transparency, because when you avoid conflict, you just create an environment that breeds more of it. Right?
It's toxic.
It's toxic. It's a festering wound. And so I think having a transparent culture, right, where you say, okay, let's air the classic Seinfeld, the airing of grievances, right?
Yeah. You got to do it.
Yeah, and it's ugly, and I think a lot of people don't want to feel like they aren't liked. And so we avoid saying things because we're afraid it's going to offend a person. And it's like, well, but we can approach those things in a productive way so that we get our team on track and moving forward. And so, I think
that's so tied to the clear statement of objective, meaning which is if we can battle this out, but as long as we know that it's all in the name of this greater good,
this North Star.
Yeah, we can plow through it.
Yes.
And it's just there's not enough time to sit and fester. Let's just keep going.
Keep going.
And
take the steps.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in as soon as you know something, say something.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's not going to get better with time.
Yeah, and and that takes some
I
vulnerability.
don't mean just in work, really. I mean just in general.
Yeah.
When you know it, say it.
But you do have to be able to share yourself a little bit, right? You have to make yourself vulnerable, in that you want other people to feel like they can approach you and say, "Hey, this is something that I'm experiencing. It's a little bit of a challenge. How can we get through this?"
We'll just get your replacement. You said you could do this.
Right.
No, I would never do that. But so yours is you would be really taking stock of, okay, who are the players on this team? What's the best position for them?
Absolutely. Because everybody wants.
How do you do that? How do you
player.
Sort of figure that out?
It's tough, right? Reading the room is it's tough. Some people are just inherently bad at reading other people. It happens to be something that I do pretty well, right? But I will kind of bucket these strengths, right? And I have kind of a big long list of things that I consider to be workplace strengths, right? Discipline, analytical skills, the ability to intake information. The ability to regurgitate information, because they're very different, right? And so, and I'm kind of always keeping an eye on. Some people are very strategic. Some people are so tactical. I'm a tactical person.
Okay.
Right? I don't want to ever set your battle plan, but if you tell me to get my team up that hill, I got this.
You got it.
I got this.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just set Staci loose. She's
yes, and that's the truth, right? That is something that I will brag about. If you tell me where you need this to go, I'll get it there.
And don't you dare tell me it can't be done.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll figure it out.
Or tell me it can't, and I'll figure it out. Yeah.
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 No, that resonates.
Yeah, and so and a lot of times people aren't even aware of what they do well, and so just kind of watching how they interact with work on a day-to-day basis, how they interact with people or don't on a day-to-day basis. I'll give you an example. People will often, students I have had on my course evaluation say, Staci has favorites.
Of course, everyone does.
Well, and that was kind of my thought for a long time. But then I realized, I was like, no, interestingly, what I'm not good at is small talk. Right? I'm not good at pinging multiple people.
You're too much of a deep diver.
And that's it. I love the deep dive. And so, I'm fewer friendships, deeper conversations.
It's like I can't call that person back because I've never talked to them for less than 2 hours. And now it's 6 months has elapsed. Yeah. And now I just got to call and say, I'm sorry. I literally think about calling you every day. But I know we talk for 2 hours.
Yeah. And how long do you want this podcast to be?
Yeah. I mean, seriously.
Yes.
How many days you got?
Right.
Exactly.
And that's, once you start kind of figuring out, it's like, I'm going to take this criticism, or what I would consider criticism, Staci has favorites, and say, okay, well, where is that coming from? And it is coming from, there are students that I have that come to my office and we will sit for an hour.
There are people I've gotten to know.
Yes. And those, to me, that's where I find the value in life. And when I'm working with a team, I want that with my teammates to the greatest extent possible. But I would argue that the opposite is also very much a strength. Those people who can connect, they go to a party and they can work the room. Mm-hmm. That's a strength.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Right? They can connect people. They know who to go to when they need things. And, honestly, that's just not something that I do particularly well, right? I'm okay, but I'm much better.
But if someone said, here's your mission, we need you to work this room and find out 5 things from everybody, whatever.
Yeah.
It sounds like you'd be like, all right.
Yeah, I could do that.
I could do that.
Yeah.
Because but maybe on a more social basis, it's not something that you would naturally gravitate towards.
Yeah, it's not something I love, right? It's
Right.
not
Like, what's the point of that? I get a little piece of information like that.
And, let's bring that back to, again, I need to know the why. Why do I study logarithms? Why do I need to work the room? What's my objective?
Yeah. Okay.
Why am I communicating?
I understand. So as we're talking, I'm sitting here wondering, so if with our shorter attention spans, we grew up in an era of longer attention spans,
Yes.
which helps for things like theory of mind.
Yes.
Okay. So do you think, the cost of theory of mind with the shortening attention span? Like, do you find that up-and-comers have more trouble reading the room and understanding, like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot at play with this, right? I think that, if you can't pay attention to a person, you can't read them, right? If you're not doing self-reflection, because now we have this culture of everybody's a winner, right? Everybody gets the award.
Yes,
It's super self-focused,
BS.
right?
Yeah.
Then you don't have a motivation to read others because the world revolves around you,
It's
right?
okay if they're losers. Come on.
I had actually...
That's how you make winners. You got to lose for a bit.
You have to lose. And that's, I tell my kids this all the time. I'm like, the best thing you can do is screw up.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, please go do stupid
Just do
things.
it quickly, though. Like, let's not drag this
go
out.
do stupid things, right? Like, here we are. We live in a culture where every parent has Life 360 on their kids' phones and they track them. I refuse to track my children.
Yeah, I kind of don't want to know.
I refuse to do it. I want them to have the freedom to make mistakes.
Well, and also the cost of doing it is make you a nervous wreck.
Why would I do that, right? But I just, it's not fair to them.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm taking something away from them if they don't have to make difficult choices, right? Like, I could lie to her and say I'm going to the library when I'm actually going to visit my girlfriend,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, that's a moral dilemma that I want you to struggle with.
And let's see if you can get away with it, by the way.
Yeah, I don't want, yes.
See how crafty you are.
And if there are consequences, then that's also a lesson. And so I feel like I would be doing my kids a disservice, and that's it. I will add this in here. This was super interesting to me. I had a PhD student that I was working with, and she was on the medical campus, but her research centered on autism, and her theory is that autism is an evolutionary result of technology.
I think I'm getting that.
Yeah.
Well, because theory of mind and autism sort of run together.
Yeah, and so her theory is, if you think about the characteristics of children that have autistic traits, shorter attention span, not necessarily comfortable with touch, right? Often they prefer electronic voices to human voices because it's more predictable. And so, it's a very interesting theory.
And has this been, hard one to study because there's so many variables that it'd be hard to control for.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
So how are they approaching it? This is a theory at this point.
Yeah.
Has it been tested?
She was testing it at the time, right? I haven't checked in with her to see what that ultimately looks like. But she's been. What I thought was super interesting, and I actually said this to her. I said, "What I'm finding intriguing here is that you always think of evolution as a positive." And her answer is, "Isn't it?"
No. The answer is no.
But her case was, in a world with this much technology, aren't they better suited to the world to come?
You mean someone who is autistic?
Who has autistic characteristics that make them better suited to a high-tech world.
Yeah, meaning they are perhaps the tools available allow them to be more functional in our world than maybe 50 years ago.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what. Yeah, that's exactly.
Or what she
right.
might be saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know enough to say.
Yeah, I don't either.
But I my cursory understanding with that, my experience is that yes, I think that it's very fact-based sort of communication, and that the theory of mind and this, and I'm talking about male autism, female autism is a whole different deal.
Right.
But yeah, I think I can see, based on what I know, that it would be an easier way to get along.
Yeah, and I am a tech fan. You know, I use it. I love how it makes my life a little bit easier, or a lot easier in some cases. But I also have a big sticker on my laptop that says social media seriously harms your mental health.
Yeah, and you believe that?
Oh, I 100% believe that.
And do you touch on that in your classes?
Yes, absolutely. You know, what's interesting is you don't do social media. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, no. No.
Are you on it at all?
Yeah, I mean, I have an account, like a Facebook account.
Yeah, and I run in that same kind of
I opened it up. I was like, got invited to be a friend like 8 years ago. Like it's pathetic.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of the same way. But when I tell my students I don't do social media, they're puzzled, right? They're baffled. How can you live your life and not have social media? And then they get an internship, and they come back and they go, "Oh my God, you literally don't have time." I said, "No, of course I don't have time."
Yeah.
I have living creatures in my house that I have to keep alive, right? Children, dogs, right?
What I would add to
I
that,
have
like
a job.
To a degree, why would, if you're growing up, it's so hard already to manage your real life.
Yes.
Now let's add a bunch of virtual stuff in
Yes.
there that, had you never discovered it, your life would really be no different. The
Right.
downside risk is far greater than the upside risk.
Well, absolutely. And, it's also just this measure of, if you were to say, okay, if I take a look at the things that I've done in my life and I say, these were the most impactful moments in my life, 0 were online. Unless it was negative.
Right.
Unless it was negative. You had an online bullying situation or something of the sort. But the most impactful moments of your life were IRL, if you will.
Yeah. No, exactly. And the other thing is that I say this to my kids, and I don't know how much they hear it, but for instance, if they're outside kicking a ball around or whatever, and we're having fun, we always laugh and have fun on the way back inside.
Yes.
About how something happened, or even if someone gets drilled by a ball and they're hurt. By the time we get inside, we're laughing and having fun. But anytime I tell them, like, I took iPads. We don't even have them in our house.
Good.
And because I was like, fight instigators, first of all. And even if they're having a blast while they're using it, they will not be happy when they put it down.
Yes.
Right? So it always ends on a sour note.
Yes. And
so why in the hell would I want any of that to be part of their lives?
Missouri just passed a law that, and governor just signed it, no cell phones in schools. Yep. From start of the day to the end of the day. And the uproar from my kids and their friends is legion.
Good.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, talk about deaf ears.
Exactly.
I mean, literally not worried about that.
Not at all.
And they just don't know what a good move that is.
It's a wonderful move. And, I teach some days. I'm in the classroom from 8:30 to 4:30, and I don't have my cell phone with me. And, again, people are just baffled by that. Well, you didn't respond within 30 minutes. And I said, of course I didn't. I didn't even have my phone.
I never asked you to email me.
I know. I get 24 hours is what I get at a minimum.
Yeah, I never asked you to do that. It's so moving on into, I don't want to, we could talk for days, it seems like. But so AI, tell me how you're telling your students to deal with the AI, and how is academia, how do you guys manage it? I mean, you're sort of telling them one thing and you might be actually doing it yourselves over here.
Yeah, it is an interesting dilemma in academia, because you do have so many professors that said or started off with absolutely not. And it kind of made me laugh, because I was like, well, you can, of course it's going to happen. 100%.
The bell has been rung.
The bell has been rung. It is 100% going to happen. And, truly, I won't lie. I mean, I do think, mental health issues are different now than they used to be. And, I see there's much higher prevalence of it in my class. And there's also a drive. Students feel like they have to do everything, right? And you probably see it with your kids. It's, okay, how many soccer teams, how many baseball teams, what other activities, right? So there's all of these things on the radar. And so, you knew immediately that people were going to give where they could give,
Yeah.
right? And, generative AI made that really easy. My immediate approach was to allow it because you're going to be using it in the workplace. Now, we do have, there are an enormous number of industries that still aren't using it because of proprietary issues, right? So you've got, banking or medical fields. Education, we actually have a separate chat GPT, a WashU chat GPT for student information. So if you were using student or patient information, if you're on the medical campus, it has to run through a specific system so that you're not releasing anything that's confidential.
Yes.
Law is another one that's been really interesting to watch.
It's not going to help that. I mean, it's not, if you're an attorney, I would be very worried.
Right?
I'd be very worried.
Right. But of course, you're seeing the industry as a whole push back on it, which I think is really interesting because couldn't you, in theory, use AI to create more just outcomes for criminal cases, right? It's like, okay, well, if I look at the entire bank of people who committed this crime in the past 5 years and I can see what those sentences were, I can make sure I'm giving an unbiased, fair sentence, right? That seems like a good thing to me.
Yeah.
But in academia, the question is obviously, what are the students learning? Are they learning anything at all? Right? And so, because you can use it for data, you can use it, you've got now Copilot within the Microsoft Office suite. So even if you're having to use Excel, you've got all of these resources available to you. And so the way that I'm using this is, I've shifted to a whole lot more physical activity within the classroom, right? I bring in whiteboards or poster boards. I've got Post-it notes, and I'm like, first thing we're going to do is ideate. Yeah. And so we walk through, troubleshoot issues, but I'm like, laptops are closed. But then we'll open up our laptops and go to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever they're preferring at the moment, whatever the AI du jour happens to be.
Yeah.
Let's run it through AI and see where we missed some things, right? And then we take a second to reflect on that. But what I tell them is I'm like, you're not gaining anything if you're creating content with it. It's going to give you poor content. I can tell you it's going to write a C paper.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
And you can tell when
oh.
somebody has sat down and crafted something with like really thinking, and they're like just spun something out using AI.
Yeah.
And the argument will be, well, just give it time. And and I think that's true, but I think that we have to believe there is a human element of creation, I hope, that is uniquely human.
You would like to think so, right? But
it's building a massive mirror is what it's really doing.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because you've got, let's just take the creative element, AI generated art. Mm-hmm. And, it was always a little vague what constitutes art in the first place.
True.
But, why is AI art not art? Just because it wasn't drawn by a human, is that art? Is poetry created by AI? Is it actual poetry? And we have these demands, right? As a society, we have like these, we say, okay, this is a core value of mine. This is a thing I would never give on. And, it's like, okay, the environmental impact of generative AI or the impact on people's employment, right? All of these things that come up, but we're still going to sit there and use it.
Yeah,
right.
Everyone's going to have blood on their hands.
Absolutely, all going to have blood on our hands. But it's funny how it shifts too, right? Our expectations of it, the things that we demand of people that use it, shift. And one of the greatest examples I always think of is early AI days, or when ChatGPT was first out. There was a school shooting in Michigan, and a different university issued a statement on it, right? Issued a statement to the student base saying, if you need someone to talk to, right, we're horrified by it. We're here for you. But at the bottom of the message, it said, that it was drafted by ChatGPT. And the outroar was crazy, right? The outroar within the university, the outroar, on media was just out of control. And so one of the questions that I had is I said, okay, but they did everything right. It was transparent.
Yeah.
Right? It was transparent. And people said there needs to be a human element. right? My student said this, you have to have a human element. This is a message that should have come from the heart. And they said the chancellor should have sent it themselves. And it might not have even been the chancellor who had it. The
Once
name
you
on it, right?
digitize something, it's a whole weird, like, even though they wrote it, like, just the way you're sending it, if it's ever electronic, it's like, do you lose a human?
Well,
you know,
right.
like,
But, you know,
where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line? And, you know, but when I kicked it back to him and said, but the chancellor was never going to write it in the first place. The chancellor has a PR staff. It was some PR person who would have written that, who would have passed it to other people within the group, and it would have been refined multiple times before it went to the chancellor, who really kind of just gave it a stamp of approval. So what's the difference between a digital administrative assistant and a physical human administrative assistant? And nobody seems to have a really good answer for that.
That's a tough one.
Right?
It's a good question. What is the difference?
What's the difference?
Because are they saying that we don't care who wrote it as long as it came from a human?
A human?
Is that effectively what they're saying?
It seems to be, right? But, you know, I said either way, if you want to, the way that you're approaching this argument, you're saying it's disingenuous, right? That the person who signed this didn't actually write it.
You know, it's also
does it matter
interesting
who wrote
is
it?
like what human exists that they've been like, it would have meant more if it just come from like ChatGPT. You know, if like Charles Manson writes it, you know, and you're like, you know what I mean? Like there's an inflection point where it's like,
Yeah.
you know, that was a nice thought. I wish I didn't know they wrote it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and it's real. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've used ChatGPT I tend to be a very direct person. I'm like, I need you to soften this
Yeah.
message.
Round out some edges here.
Yes. And, you know, and that's real. And in reality, if I think about it, I go, okay, well, is that disingenuous? Is that inauthentic?
Well,
Just because I'm not good at softening it, I wanted to soften it.
well, it's hard to say now because it's like now you have this helper.
Yeah. Yeah. The systems are incredible, though, right? Just this whole concept of, you know, a machine that can generate content, right? That you can actually just have a conversation with, but it's so easy to anthropomorphize that, to say, okay, it's like a human. And you say, okay, well,
Yes.
it thinks this, or, you know, it's giving me this opinion. And none of that is real, right? It's just math. It's just probabilities at scale, right?
Yeah.
And it's absolutely incredible the way that it just says, okay, well, what would be the likely next group of letters? Not even a word, just the likely next token or group of letters. And
It's mind-boggling.
it's mind-boggling. But I think, you know, when you realize that that's actually how it works, right? It's, okay, I've got this database of language, this big corpus of language, and it's really just going to filter through that and say, okay, based on the information that I have, these are the likely next letters, and so that's what I'm going to put out there. You all of a sudden go, okay, well, now I understand where this is coming from, right? I understand how to communicate with it a little bit better. I understand how to prompt it a little bit better. It's a fascinating thing to play with.
Well, especially, I mean, back to the idea of people have blood on their hands. It's like everyone knows what's happening right now.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so convenient and so useful and entertaining as well that people just keep walking right to it.
Right to it.
Just like zombies, like
And
just walking right into it.
I don't think it can go anywhere good. And
It's hard to imagine that it does.
And don't think it can be. I don't think we can stop ourselves.
Mm-mm.
You know, how do you pull the plug? Even if you said, right, we're going to have international laws and regulations on this, or internationally we're going to pull the plug. You got bad actors. It's out there. It's done.
No, the bell at the highest tower has been rung.
Yes.
And you can't unring it, because if we fall behind, like, it's a benefit to our country to have so many people using it.
Right.
Because it's learning at such a rapid rate.
Yeah. And, you know, here's the, right now, I mean, it's kind of amazing, right? It's sort of, in a way, it levels the playing field for businesses, right? Mm-hmm. It levels the playing field because never before has everybody had such access to open source tools, you know, of this level. But likewise, you know, you do have, organizations that have unlimited, well, not unlimited, but that have vast financial resources have the ability to do it even better.
Yes.
Right. And so while it does level the playing field in some ways, the potential for inequality with these systems is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, the rate at harvest
Yeah.
of information and how do you put that information into action is, you could have 20 people mining something versus one, and then they can write programs to, collate all this
Absolutely.
and they're off to the races.
Yeah.
And so there is going to be such a good thing as good at AI and bad at AI.
Yeah. And, the quote is, AI is probably not going to take your job, but the person who knows how to use it is going to take your job.
I just commented the other day that somebody it was like one of the first solicitation emails I'd gotten from somebody who's a consultant on like how to leverage AI, like really leverage. I read it and I was just like, I gotta remember that because that's the first time that I've been sort of outright being like, how are you leveraging this? And it's just a turning of the tide in a big way.
Big way, right? I was here at the birth of the home computer.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sending my first email, which was so fun, by the way. That was so fun.
It was unbelievable.
Well, yeah, because you'd send the email and then you'd call the person to see if they got it.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you'd talk about whatever
Because
was
it
in
was
the email.
sending it out into the abyss.
Right? And you just sit there and stare at your screen.
Because, you don't
so
get
cool.
confirmations that it's just
Right.
it's been sent.
I know. Yeah.
We don't even think about it.
It was so great.
What was that, like 95 or
Something like that, yeah, yeah. And I was blown away, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. But this is off the charts, incredible. And if you aren't using it in your business, if you're not, even if your business isn't using it, if you're not within your role, you're doing yourself just such a disservice.
I agree wholeheartedly, and it's just like go ahead and embrace this because it's really not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere.
It's not. You can hate it as much as you want. And I said years ago here, I was just like, guys, whether we like it or not, this is here, and it wasn't even here yet. And I would say this is occurring, and we need to embrace this.
You do, and I think the biggest mistake I think people make with it is just going in with these too big of a question without nearly enough context.
You've got, it's like so clear. You're going to get out of this, but you put into it.
Yeah, and it's a baby step process.
Yeah, you do have to spoon feed it.
Yes.
And I'm careful about what I decide to put in there and not put in there, right? There are things that, and it's probably foolhardy, meaning like it's going to figure it all out anyway, right?
Yeah.
But and we're so mindful with everything we do here, like what are we going to put through AI and what are we not? It doesn't need to know who people are. It doesn't need to know any of that. That's their decision on how they want to interact with it. So we don't use it for any, it doesn't interact with our databases or anything like that in a way that could ever, because we don't know how the rules are going to be in the future. Right? Like we have accounts that say, okay, this information will not be used to train our model, or this information will not. I'm like, really? That's so untrue.
It's so untrue. And
then does it also mean while you're subscribed? So the moment you unsubscribe, are you going to unleash all this into that larger pool of training? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
And so it's complete BS as far as like these guardrails that they're going to put around this thing. Like, oh, we're not going to share. You have this proprietary. No, you don't.
Yeah, no, there's never been a better example of a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a cliff.
It's insane. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, right? And even if you said, okay, we're going to take this data and we're going to use it to train our model, can you likewise then use that data to train a different model? Is that okay? And what's the line on what's already publicly available? Say, for example, books, right? I can get a book at the library.
Mm-hmm.
It's publicly available. Can I put that book into my database as a training element, right? Because now all of a sudden, well, the author's not getting royalties, but I was going to get it at the library anyway, right?
Yeah. it's
You know,
problematic.
or if your art is online and it's available for me to view anytime, why can I not use that?
Yeah, there's no ownership.
There's nothing. There's no ownership.
And then you could like immediately probably scan like the all the patent offices and start get all these ideas going. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's the implications of it are
But worse yet, there's no accountability,
right.
right? There's no explainability with the systems. You can't explain how they work.
Right.
It
just does.
just does. It's a black box. You cannot explain how it works, and there is no accountability for it.
Until there is.
At some point. But then who, right? Like we've already gone through the process of, is the developer liable? Is it the people that train it? Is it the person who used it?
It's just so interesting. We all know this. Anyone who uses it, and we all are careful. And there's a right. There's an ethical way to use it, and not use it, and where does it interface internally in your business and so forth. And what do you shield from it? Like it doesn't interface at all. But those who are using it are sort of, I don't know, it's kind of like that diet mentality of like, I always eat this on Tuesday night, so it doesn't kind of count,
These calories don't count.
Yeah, these calories don't count. But full well that they do.
They do.
And you just kind of like keep cramming it down your throat.
I know, and it's so good.
Yeah, it's so good, and no one's got to know.
Yes.
That's how it is.
Yes. My big concern with it, though, is just really, because I think it's something that we're already seeing. It's just a broad loss of critical thinking ability.
Yeah.
And I do believe that this is going to exacerbate that. And that, to me, is worrisome because, if you think about a world in which it goes away, right? Like, you think about the electromagnetic pulse that takes out everything. Mm-hmm. And, in that scenario, what do we say? Like 90% of Americans would be dead within a year?
Yeah.
Right? It's a spooky situation. But even, you can't, how do you come back from this, right? Like, let's say you just took it away, and can we even think? Can we think? Can we write? Can we analyze?
As of right now, I think we're good. But I don't think they're turning it off right now.
They're not.
No.
They're not only
it's
are they
just
not
gaining
turning
ahead
off.
of steam.
Oh my gosh, the amount of progress they've made with it. When ChatGPT came out, what was that, 2023, maybe November?
Yeah.
Oh
Sounds
yeah,
about
and
right.
it was it was hallucinations, and it's not very good at insights, and it's like, oh, it's amazing at all this stuff. It doesn't remember information. Like, it remembers everything.
It's built. The reason it works is because it remembers everything.
It remembers everything.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up because I know we could talk all day, but Staci, thank you for coming in today.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
It's been a fun conversation.
All right, thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.